on last week's episode of Living the Dream.
Anyway, I'm getting into a whole bunch of stuff. I'm almost skipping over a lot of stuff that I even want to bring out already.
Well, codependent is the breeding ground for mental slavery, and insecurity, all of that ties into what you're saying. And you got to have a lot of courage to be able to make a change in all your examples you are giving based on the young lady being in the relationship. I've seen it play out many times personally. And the problem has been that it stimulated from codependent and insecurity.
Wow.
The honest truth about it is a lot of people aren't that courageous enough to die rather than being a slave. And I use that in an analogy form. It's either death or liberty. And that's how I looked at things. And that's why I've been chastised a lot through my lifetime because, as my grandmama would say, I was too contrary.
Welcome to an IEXIST podcast. Our entire mission can be summed up in one phrase: becoming all that we are. It is our belief that fulfillment doesn't come from changing into things you aren't, but rather from becoming everything that you already are. And ultimately, we're here to press and empower you to lead lives that are full of fulfillment. We've dedicated this specific podcast to the dream, not to having the dream or even talking about the dream, but to living the dream. The reality is that there's a stark difference between having a dream and manifesting one. Here you'll gain insight and wisdom keys directly from some of the water walkers of our generation, dream practitioners, those who have decided to tread paths where there were none, to step out into only what they could see. Come take a peek into the minds of some who, from within, create our world's most magnificent realities. I'm the creator and host, Bryan Pharr, and this is the Living the Dream podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 15th episode of Living the Dream, the podcast. I am your host, Bryan Pharr, and I want to thank you for joining us today. First of all, if you have not listened to the first part of New Slaves featuring guest and entrepreneur Jamel Carpenter, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that before you listen to this one. The reason being that there are a lot of references in this podcast to things that were said in the last. And so in order to gain a full context of everything that's being said, I would definitely go back and listen to that one before you do this one. Secondly, I want to say that this is, I feel, one of the most important messages that could be given in a time like this in which we're living. And so I wouldn't skimp out on either one of these. If I were you, make sure you check out episodes 14 and 15. Believe me, all of them are good, in my opinion. And so honestly, you should listen to them all, but definitely listen to both of these. Now I want to jump straight into this new episode. Have a good time listening, and I'll meet you on the other side of it. Absolutely. Turn people against you because it's out of the ordinary for a person to ask questions and to want to be, even if you have a desire to self-educate and things like that. Man, I've been in so many scenarios. Even as a musician, I remember just talking about going to college, and it was such a big commotion. I'm not going to say like 1,000 people were involved, but I'm saying with the particular person I was talking to, you would have thought we had a conversation about me admitting that I shot his mama. You know what I mean? It's just like, bruh, where's all of this coming from? Again, rather than looking at it as this was an opportunity for a person to be more educated and to become better at their craft, you were potentially losing somebody. And even what I was going to school for at the time was associated with what I was doing for the actual person, and that's a whole nother angle of it too. We're talking about mental slavery here. I want to keep you dumb. That's a whole nother side of it.
Yes. Oh, man. Just to agree with what you're saying, that was the really disappointing part through my journey in growing up and mentally growing, that when I finally got some clear understanding, I realized people weren't really trying to help people.
Wow.
They were just trying to keep them enslaved. And that was very disappointing to me. And, it's real.
Absolutely. And so let's reference where we started from. We were talking about how most people look at slavery on the physical level. And I'm almost like, as much as I don't want that to happen to anybody, I'm like, thank God we have some type of reference or example that's on the physical level so that we can parallel it with what we're saying now. You got to think about it. Black slaves in America were not allowed to learn how to read, because when I want you to think you're dumber than me and that I should be over you, the last thing I want you to do is to actually go out here and start learning something. So a lot of these places, again, whether business, whether political, having to do with whatever sector in the world you can really involve yourself. What you're saying too is that these leaders or, these organizations, they will portray themselves as being there to actually help you. But then when it comes down to what will really help you, which is reading, which is studying, which is taking personal responsibility, there's never too much of a push for you to do that. Or here's how they'll play you. They'll do both, right? So on one side of it, they'll speak out of their mouth. You need to read books on business. You need to read this religious book or this Bible. You need to read more books on politics. You need to read these history books, whatever the situation is, right? But out of the other side of their mouth, they'll make you think through a measure of statements that they're the only person you should gain information through, right? And so it'll almost be like, sure, you can go read as long as you bring that information back to me and I approve with what you get out of it.
Boy, listen here, boy. Man, manipulation, boy.
Absolutely. Again, what we're talking about here is mental slavery. There's no freedom. And I think there's a lot of people that honestly do it because they think it's their duty. Somebody pumped them up when they was 4 or 5. You're a leader. You're going to be this and you're going to be that. And you grew up and became a control freak and thought that was leadership. And that's not the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And another thing is what I'm thinking about it, if you're trying to imagine what kind of people these people even look like for the people listening, most of the time these are your people who are in leadership, who are maybe your mentors or life coaches at times. People always in advisory roles are the people who are the most manipulative and trying to keep you enslaved mentally. If you're listening to this conversation and you're trying to figure out what these people look like.
Absolutely. This is literally where you have to be the most attentive to leadership roles. And more specifically, as you even said, advisory roles, because this could be your friend. You know what I mean? Like this could just be in your set group of friends. And the person that always just feels the need to advise everybody, there's potential there that you may be dealing with wolfish type people or people who like to have ultimate control or enslave the minds of others in order to get their will done in your life, essentially. Always wanting you to think a certain way. And so we'll bring this up in a little bit, but there's a thin line too, because that's not to say that there aren't good people who are advising people. That's not to say that there aren't good people who are in leadership roles. Not at all. You know what I mean? I don't think that I would have been as educated as I am, nor you, nor a lot of people who decide to even go a different route themselves. I don't know that we would have had some of the tools, at least, that we have if it wasn't for good people, for good leadership.
Right. Well, you just have to rely on your insight and some experience to be able to see certain behaviors and things like that, man. And, it's hard, man. It's always hard talking to people when you're that insightful person and you can see things occurring 20 steps ahead of the person who's actually going through it. And you're trying to relay that message to them to be careful or warn them of certain things. It's hard to get through to them. And, one of my things that I've really been thinking about through my experience with people and in situations, I think a word of advice is the person delivering the message, don't be so quick to walk away from those people. And secondly, the people that's receiving the message, don't be too quick to ignore the message. It always takes time for things to develop, to come to light. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And, maybe that could help somebody who's trying to get through to somebody or help another person who's tired of hearing somebody always tell them about certain situations in their life. I just thought that was something that is really important to grab a hold to and to think about.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important what you're saying, because ultimately, to be real honest with you, that could help in a lot of different areas. And I've already been thinking like, especially about halfway through this, as we were talking, I'm like, man, it's going to be some people who think we're conspiracy theorists or something like that. You know how it goes. It's like nobody wants to hear that about people that they've put a lot of trust into. You know what I mean? And so it's hard to convince somebody of that once you've dedicated everything. I'll give you the honest truth. I got in trouble one time by virtue of me wanting to do the right thing. I promise you, if I had a heart and mind to just expose a bunch of people and try to get revenge, or if that was my thing, trust me, I'd just be calling names. I'd be 50 Cent and everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes I think that needs to be done, but that's not my MO most of the time. You know what I mean? And so that's not particularly the angle that I go from, but I will use example. And I remember specifically at one point in time, just out of virtue of wanting to not allow somebody to sit in the dark, they were talking to me about a particular leader, and I told them to keep quiet about it, to be honest with you. But I'm like, listen, I think you need to double check your information on this. You know what I mean? And so honestly, they went and immediately started double checking information and public information, to be honest with you. And the problem was there was so much money invested into that situation for this person that, it just took them off the rails immediately. And it ended up backfiring for a person like me, who was honestly just trying to look out for somebody on a personal level. Again, just doing the double checking just to know what you're really involved in and what we're really involved in, so that you can act accordingly if you find yourself in a predicament that's not the most healthy. And
right.
Of course, I'm expelled from the situation really quickly. But what I'm saying is, when people are invested into situations, that makes it hard for them to hear what you're saying. You know what I mean? And so my brain is literally going to things that we both know is real. And a lot of people won't admit it, because a cult doesn't have to be little. It can be big. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's a thin line. I get it. I get that you should be thankful for the land in which we live and the liberties that were at least proposed to you about America or whatever. But it's a thin line between being respectful and then becoming codependent and actually turning even the flag of America into a literal cult symbol. And it literally happens all the time. And I won't even go into a whole bunch of that, not out of fear or anything, but I don't want to waste a lot of time on that. I'm using that to say you may not want to admit that you're a part of a cult or something like that. And specifically, as you're talking about the people that we're talking to, the people who are trying to shed light for a person that are involved in these things. We've seen little examples, even on TV. This happens every now and then. You can go to Google and search about cults and things like that, and parents who were concerned because their children got into cults and literally had such a hard time pulling these people because they were so convinced, because the leadership, the manipulation was so good. And nobody is past that. That's the information that I'm putting out. You're not past being fooled. You understand what I'm saying?
That's true.
And so
Very true.
you have to do your research. And I want this to be said too. I don't even want people to just take our first word for it. Again, it's like you said, you got to give time for things too, and not necessarily just throw everything away that somebody is saying, because it does take time for things to happen.
Correct.
And I'm the type of person that's like, to think that I don't have any misinformation. Nobody wants to have misinformation and things like that. But to think that I've never been wrong ever, or not the most accurate about everything initially, is quite arrogant. Again, I try to talk about only things I know about, which is a whole nother subject. But here's the thing. I'm the type of person that says this: if I be right, trust me, time will show it. You know what I'm saying? And there's things I do know that certain listeners will not know for years. You know what I mean? But I'm okay with that. If it looks wrong now, there ain't no pride in it. There ain't no ego. I don't need to be right now. Of course, if I'm close to you and I'm really concerned about you, of course, I would want you to believe me. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you're speaking to and saying, don't just throw people that really love and care about you. These people don't have any record against you. They ain't never tried to hurt you before. So don't just be so quick to throw them off if they're trying to expose something to you to where you really could be in these type of situations. You have to look at it from all angles, even in their intent. And that doesn't mean they're always right or 100% correct. But again, at least take it in so that you can possibly have some good perspective from the outside of your situation that will help you, right? And Jamel, I could almost say, I don't know why I'm talking about this now, but I do know why I'm talking about this, because we're going through the days right now of exposure. And so much will be and has been exposed in the coming days and even the days that have passed. This whole COVID-19 situation is much more than people will want to admit that it is. It's going to be good for a lot of people. And I'm using it as a silver lining because I know it's difficult. I understand. But we are going through the days of exposure. You know what I mean? And so maybe I'm just prefacing a lot of stuff that will happen in the coming days. It's just instinct or it's just insight. You know what I mean? Talking. Those are the days that we're living in. And so let's be open, I think is what you're really saying. For people who may have been mental slaves their entire life, and this is the first time you're hearing anybody even talk to you this way or talk about the subject matter this way. But at the end of the day, it's all to help. And I'm leery about saying that, but it'll be a help if you allow it to.
Absolutely.
And if I can pad you in any type of way so that the exposure about these things that are going to come forward does not actually devastate you or depress you to the point of no return, I want to do that. And so I need to let you know that there are things that are very real concerning, again, this new slave ideology. Absolutely, it's gone way too far when it gets all the way to this physical level in which you're putting people in chains and having them literally
Servant.
more than that, just the ultimate degrading of a human being. And I'm sure there's people who care about pets that much. You know, they don't even like to see animals treated the way that, for example, black people were treated here in America, and then many slaves throughout history of many nationalities, because, you know, slavery wasn't always determined by skin tone in the world. But so let's talk about one more thing. Again, this is called Living the Dream. And this is very big subject matter because, again, like I was saying earlier, a lot of people do not understand how far they have to go in order to live the dream. And because I am a black guy, because we are black men, you know, a lot of people say I started from the bottom. I don't know what's below the bottom, but everybody's bottom ain't the same. You understand what I'm saying?
That's true.
And so having to come from certain places, certain mentalities, certain systems that might be just not only systematic in terms of institutions that we've named today, even in your bloodline, family line, breaking generational literal curses, you know what I mean? In which everybody you know before you was poverty.
Right.
I'm saying on top of whatever systematic stuff may be coming from the outside. I'm saying the stuff that you have to fight through with family and neighborhood and, you know, everybody's bottom isn't the same. Trust me.
Yes.
I think it's necessary to talk from this angle a lot of times, even on Living the Dream. And not just, you know, whether or not you need to start an S Corp or a C Corp or an LLC or, you know what I mean? Like, that's all good. But I know particularly that there'll be people like me whose bottom wasn't the same that need to hear, okay, but how do I get from here, though? You know what I mean? From a different rock bottom. And so here's another sign of who you need to be leery of. You always need to check the fruit. You need to make sure that what's coming out of these people's mouths is literally a result in their life.
Correct. Absolutely.
And, you know, I've said this before in probably a few podcasts at this point, but you don't need anybody teaching you how to be happy and is depressed as all get out. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow. Absolutely.
Etc. Take that all the way down the line. And I talked about this a good bit within the last 2 episodes, but there's a difference between learned and lived, right? And you need to lean towards somebody that's actually produced real results. Again, it ain't an ego thing for me. If it wasn't me that you needed to go through in order to learn how to do something, there's no offense taken to that. I'm literally telling you that one of the things you need to watch out for is people who are very intent on teaching things that they know nothing about. Again, that are in these advisory roles.
Right.
They can't put it together for you. They just talking. I would say out their ass, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a lot of people who read a lot of information who are very persuasive, and that's actually one of their gifts, you know, and can tell you how something works or how it's done in such a persuasive way that it feels as though they've lived. So this is where things get tricky, and you have to rely on your insight and experience to be able to tell the difference.
Writer, producer, artist, coach, and inspirational motivational speaker, Bryan Pharr takes us on a deep, retrospective, and introspective journey ranging from his childhood until life today that invokes the question, will I live a life of significance or one of safety? Filled with experience-gained wisdom and revelatory insights, A New Home dares its readers to ask themselves the hard questions concerning their need to fit in. How far will you go? And will all the efforts you've made be worth it in the end? This perspective-shifting discourse is a must-read, and through its hard-hitting yet relatable, tear-jerking, and even at points comical nature may prove to be more of a life-changing event than just a good Sunday morning read. Get your physical copy today at becomingallthatweare.com.
Absolutely. And I'll say this too. You're bringing up a good point, because sometimes you won't be beyond your experience to even know the things that we're talking about. And we'll give keys in a minute to, again, how to at least start to get from the bottom. But the problem is that to the untrained eye, the manipulator and the originator both look exactly the same.
That's very, very, very true. Very true.
Because the manipulator is actually capitalizing off of the originator, right? And so they're going to do their best to make themselves look exactly like the originator to you.
Absolutely.
But it's only to capitalize, and their intent is very different.
Yes.
And so, again, I want you to have keys in order to know the difference, because, again, to the untrained eye, you're not going to know the difference. And that's how people get in many of these predicaments anyway. And so let's go back to the first example. You got the guy that is considered a great husband of a traditional family, who is protector, provider, all these things, right? And so you're just looking for those signs, and you come across a guy who is well established financially. And after you go out on a date and he notices that there's another guy looking at you from across the street, and he gets a little angry and shows a little jealousy in that moment, you might take that as protection. You know what I mean? And so you're thinking you're seeing the same signs. And again, it ends up being the guy or the husband or the boyfriend that ends up beating you for the rest of your life, because from a distance, to the untrained eye, it looks the same. You understand what I'm saying?
Very true. Yes.
And so it's very important to know the difference, as we're saying. The more I keep doing this and I talk to people that are educated enough or experienced enough to talk with me about these things, it's like I want to go back and do master classes with all of us. Someday we'll formulate how exactly to do that. I would want to do it right, but like just give a full no holds bar conversation, probably in a private type of setting, and really go for it, where I can call out names without being considered a hater and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I don't wish bad upon anybody. You know what I mean? But you do have to lay in the bed that you've made for yourself. So,
absolutely.
Unfortunately. So let's just give them real keys real quick. I think that have helped us along the way to kind of getting outside of the frame or establishing something new for yourself. And maybe even just speak to people that are like us too. You know what I mean? Because I know it's one or two at any given place.
Absolutely. The world is big, man. And actually, I will start that conversation, and I will reference Killer Mike's statement on finding out truth or wanting to understand things. And one thing that brother said, I'm a huge fan of his. I knew I was going to be a fan of his the first time I heard him open his mouth to speak. Very passionate, very raw. I love the guy. But one thing he said was that you have to have a genuine curiosity.
Absolutely.
Whether that's in finding out information, becoming an entrepreneur, anything. You definitely have to have a genuine curiosity. And, if you're talking about entrepreneurship, man, basically, man, you have to have always been in this thing looking for how it works, if that makes sense. Not all of a sudden you're into it because of the people that's around you are excelling at it and you never had an interest. I'm not saying that you can't come, but you have to be genuine about really trying to do this thing. It's not a trending thing. It's not a cool points thing, because I think that once you start it, it becomes a forever thing.
Absolutely.
So going back to the statement, you have to have a genuine curiosity. Because your homeboy is a doctor doesn't mean that you can become a doctor. It does not matter how much y'all went through together or how long y'all lived together over in your younger days. There are people that have a different capacity for that kind of field. And I'm using doctor as an example. It could be anything, lawyer, musician, anything, clothing, creator, whatever the case may be. That there are people who genuinely have that gifting. And if you're trying to keep up with those people, you're going to fail miserably.
Absolutely. Or, let me say this, or you won't get fulfillment out of it. And I love that you're saying this, because it's my literal exact heart when it comes down to this whole living the dream. In the intro for this actual podcast, again, I state that at IEXIST, the belief is that fulfillment doesn't come from changing into things you aren't, but rather from becoming everything that you are. And so even within the curiosity, there has to be a curiosity based upon what it is that you are, not just random things, not just things that are trending, not I'm a life coach because it's popular now. I'm an entrepreneur because it's popular now.
Absolutely.
There just has to be a genuine curiosity, but it needs to be a directed curiosity too. And it reminds me of what Eric Thomas was saying about when he sat down with Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett says, I read 6 hours a day, right? But what Warren Buffett told him was, what annoys him about him talking about his regimen is that normally people ask right afterwards what he reads.
Right.
And he's like, that's not the thing that you should particularly be concerned about, because now I know you're getting into sometimes the imitation game. That's not to say that you're always wrong to ask what somebody is reading, especially if your journeys are very similar. But these would be people who aren't even into investing like him. You know what I mean? And they're asking him, what are you reading? What are you reading? And he said that he doesn't like to tell people because he reads on his craft, not everything.
Absolutely.
So it's focused reading. He's curious, but he's curious about what he does, what he has a natural propensity towards, what he has a gifting towards. And so he's naturally reading 6 hours of stocks and history on stocks and history on investing and just things like that that apply to his actual gift, right? And even broader than that, I don't want to say that a natural curiosity just has to be towards what you're going to do in life. You just need to have a natural curiosity concerning all the things that we're talking about today, because whether you're an entrepreneur or not, honestly, you just need to have a natural curiosity in general, right? You need to learn about life.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? You need to know more than one set of ideas that came directly from the line that you were possibly born into. Not that they are wrong. There are certain people who have already done a lot of work to make themselves broad and, you know, things like that. I'm not saying that they may particularly be wrong, but you need to have a genuine self-interest and not allow everybody else to be doing the work for you. Again, we're talking about a slave mentality, which comes naturally to codependent people who don't do work, who would rather everybody else do it for them. I don't have to read. My dad knows everything, right?
Absolutely.
Etc.
And let me throw this disclaimer out there. I'm currently still journeying in my entrepreneur journey, and I don't know the answers to everything, but I do know that you do have to have a genuine curiosity. I just want to make that clear, that is the foundation of even getting started and being able to consistently maintain anything that you're pursuing.
Absolutely.
On a fulfillment level, as you said, a fulfilling level for sure is the key.
Absolutely. It's so much that I want to even bring out through this conversation, man. I don't particularly know that we had a time today, but dude, it's so much, because even you saying that makes me want to talk about some other stuff. But for sure, you know, you need to have a genuine curiosity. And I will say what's next is you need to have a genuine will to work.
Yes, absolutely.
You got to have a genuine will to work and a need for a certain amount of independence. So most of the people that are in the traps that we're talking about concerning mental slavery have no desire to work.
Wow.
And then they end up working harder than the people who want to work.
Wow. Wow.
Because you're on somebody else's schedule and they're making you and demanding you, and you work in 12, 13-hour shifts because you would rather not study today. You would rather not read a book. You would rather not do any self-education. You would rather not push yourself. You would rather be told what to do because it's easier. At least I don't have to take any responsibility. I don't have to have the fear of failure that way.
Yeah.
And so partner with the genuine curiosity. You got to have the will to work, because there's no maintaining anything on your own apart from what may be a very sheepish crowd. There's no living. There's no eating without your desire and ability to work, especially as an independent or free person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just think that needs to be said. If you're willing to do the work, man, you know, it's nothing else really to it. You know what I'm saying? You know, people suffer, they die, they lack. I'm actually about to do a commercial on this very subject matter for some of the coaching I have available now. But you aren't dying. You aren't lacking because of, quote unquote, what's wrong with you. Many of you. That's happening to you because of what you don't know.
Wow.
If you actually knew the ability, the power you possess as a human being, as a person made by God, there's much more to you than you know. And so, again, we're talking about how mental slavery even comes through the veins of insecurity. And so that's why these people have to tell you that you're less than, right?
Oh, man.
But if you just knew who you were, if you just knew how to get things done, I did the podcast episode called The Secret because I wanted to expose the fact that there are no secrets. Any bit of information you need to know can be found on this planet. And I don't care if you got to pay for it through coaching or pay for it through class or pay for it in a book from the library or just go to the library and get you a doggone $10 membership a month or whatever it is, or rent it from the library or however it works now, or buy a $2-3 book on your iPhone from the bookstore or more. There's no information that cannot be found out at this point. And check this out. Even if you didn't have any of that, you can be spoken to and you can access what many call infinite intelligence. But that's for a whole nother podcast. But there's no excuse, is what I'm saying. If you're willing to do the work, it's not what's quote unquote wrong with you. It's what you don't know. That's the problem. And when somebody's trying to expose you to something, trying to shed light on something, trying to get you to know something different so that you can live more free, of course, it's shocking. Of course, it may be detrimental to the way you've thought about life thus far. You know, it may be like something that tears down everything you thought you knew. Man, and let me say this. Let me tag this on to the curiosity thing. What curiosity ultimately leads you to is the potential and actualization of learning. What curiosity leads you to is you learning more, right? But with that, what you also have to do is be willing to unlearn.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'll say it this way. If you notice, most highly, even successful people who are living their dream authentically, again, not master manipulators, they are not only highly curious, but they're always learning. Which means they're always willing to unlearn something that only served them a certain amount. Here's what's crazy. I'm not telling you that unlearning necessarily means that what you learned was bad information all the time. A lot of people are learning bad information that's coming from, again, manipulators and people who are just trying to capitalize. But I also want to say this. Sometimes the information wasn't wrong or bad, but it could only get you so far. And so if you use that information as a limit, then you can't break the rules of that information in order to get further, right? And so sometimes you have to use information as building blocks or completely tear down something that you actually thought and knew was true for a moment that got you a certain distance in order to break through to another place. You understand what I'm saying? And so as you're continuing to learn, you're always going to be replacing information also. You know what I mean? Which is why I'm willing to say, and both of us are willing to say, we're both growing. You know what I mean? We're all growing, which means the information becomes greater and greater as you go along through life. But it doesn't mean that everything is wrong either.
I think that's it, man. That's it. And as you evolve, there'll be so much more that you find that you want to share with the world and people who are listening for wherever they are in their journey in their life. Hopefully it will be of some assistance to them.
Absolutely. You know, in order to live the dream, there are certain things that you're going to have to give up, and there's certain things that you're going to have to take a hold to. And mental slavery is not a thing in fully embracing a dream. You know what I mean? And there's so much to be taken a hold of that will not be accessed with mental slavery being a thing. And so just want to offer information that can help you get out of that place so that you can begin to lead lives that are full of fulfillment. Again, that's it. And I'll be back next Sunday. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Until next time.